Hello and thank you for joining me in this third presentation in this particular panel. I'm going to be continuing to talk about online world language instruction, training, and assessment. This is a forthcoming book through Georgetown University Press, and I will be specifically talking about the last couple chapters in the book, which focus on mentorship and goal setting. Of course, the book is going to go much more in depth about this, but I'm going to just briefly go over some of the main points, and hopefully it will pique your interest and you'll find something that is applicable for your own online program. So we've been talking about in this panel an ecological formative assessment cycle, and it has several steps, as we've already talked about. Barbara Lafford and James Wormers having presented before me. And in this formative assessment cycle, we presented the Olimer rubric, which is a rubric based on language standards as well as online education. And then we talk about, in this presentation, mentorship. And we're going to cycle back through toward the end to talk about the debriefing and goal setting portions of this cycle. So in Barbara Lafford's presentation, she talks a bit about the Olimer rubric itself, self-evaluation, supervisor evaluation, and I will be hitting on the mentorship and goal setting portions of this cycle. So when we talk about mentorship, we're really building off of a lot of research that has already been established. However, mentorship is much less researched in world language education and online education. So Vatsky talks about the zone of proximal development. And this is the distance between one's ability to solve a problem alone and that same ability and how it increases when we have the guidance of someone with experience. We're also building off of the idea of instructional scaffolding, which was introduced by Wood, Bruner, and Ross in the 70s. And this is where a mentor with experience works with someone who is new to a concept or field to help them recognize possible solutions to a given problem, right? So we take zone of proximal development and instructional scaffolding, and that's what we're building. That's the theory for the mentorship that we're talking about today. So why mentorship? Well, mentorship should work in conjunction with a formal supervisor. A lot of your programs are already going to have formal evaluations or some sort of evaluation process, but they may not have a formal mentorship that works in conjunction with that. And it's so important because, the feedback provided by the supervisor, of course, provides programmatic oversight, constructive feedback, opportunities for professional development. But a lot of times the evaluation process happens, the supervisor gives this feedback, but then it's never followed up on, right? So it's really falling short of being something that is formative and something that's going to make measurable, observable change long-term in your online language program. So the mentor, as someone who's helping to continue this process of evaluation and growth. So we know that mentorship programs mitigate frustration and stress that are associated with taking on any task, but especially a new task. If you think about perhaps last time you set a goal for yourself, maybe it was to lose weight, maybe it was go to the gym, maybe it was to do more investigation. What we know is when we have someone to do that with or someone to remind us or help us, it becomes less stressful, and generally we tend to stay on that task more and don't forget it and not follow up. Also, we know that there are a lot of identity issues related to this resistance to online education. And that's because as a face-to-face instructor, especially a language instructor, your role is quite different when you become an online instructor. You become, as we know, more of someone who is setting everything up and directing the students instead of really being the center and focus of the course. Also, mentorship is part of this establishment of a community of practice, which we know improve everyone who's involved. It improves their socio-emotional health, their job satisfaction, etc. And then, of course, this idea of being exposed to a variety of perspectives, ideas, and resources. Of course, more people that are involved in a project, we have bigger diversity in perspectives. So we know that mentorship programs can be positive, and we know that they can make a big impact when they're implemented correctly. So how do we implement one of these? Cunningham and Mumford in 2005 give us some ideas. First of all, we have to have objectives. Number one, why do we have a mentorship program? And we need to have objectives that we can, again, like always, observe and measure. So how will objectives be met? And then how will they be measured? So if my objective is that my mentor is going to help my new online instructors to be able to satisfactorily use a new piece of technology, then that would be my objective. We need to discuss how they'll meet that, and then we need to measure it, right? How were they doing before? How were they doing after? And that might be with a formal pre and post assessment, or it also might be anecdotal, where we're speaking with the supervisors, are speaking with mentors, speaking with instructors to discuss how that relationship has helped them in the attainment of a specific objective. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. Also, we need to decide which instructors will participate. So many times in mentorship programs that I know that I've taken part of in other institutions, we know who's going to participate, right? A lot of times it's the newbies, the first semester or first year students or instructors. And then the mentorship partners, a lot of times this is based on volunteers and people who have experience. But again, what's missing are these first 3 points, which we really need to start with this, right? So remembering to set objectives, to discuss how the mentor and instructor are going to work to meet those objectives, and then measure them. So what is the profile of a successful mentor? Someone obviously who has experience, who has proven excellence in online education. I am currently the director of an online program at the University of Arizona. And what we do is we go through this entire evaluation process that we've been talking about on this panel. And people who have gone through it successfully and have at least 1 year of experience with our program are eligible to be mentors. But again, it is a volunteer basis. So we also need people who are going to have time. We realize this is an extra responsibility. Don't want to stress people out too much. You may offer an incentive. We offer certificates in our program. Something, maybe it counts as service if you are working with mentors that need to do service as part of their workload. So again, a way to incentivize and reward these mentors for their work, but also realizing this is going to take dedication. Also, it's important that a mentor understands the departmental policies and requirements. There's a lot of literature out there about different types of mentors. I'm specifically talking about a mentor within your institution, hopefully within your same department and program, but I realize in some small programs that just might not be feasible. Maybe you don't have anyone before who's done online world language education. So then you might reach outside of your institution. You might go to some of your social networks, conferences where you meet people. At any rate, even if that is the case, it's even more important that there is some sort of debriefing and contextualization where that external mentor really understands what's expected of the mentee and what their departmental policies and requirements are. A mentor is also going to require or encourage some risk taking, reflection, and of course, feedback. It's a two-way street. So the mentor, of course, works with the mentee, but also there needs to be communication on both sides. In an ideal world, the instructor, the mentor, and the supervisor, there would be communication between all three of those stakeholders, especially the mentor who needs to report back to the supervisor about how things are going. And then that's where the feedback can become really important for the growth and the betterment of the entire program as the supervisor takes that into account and makes changes. And then, of course, that also touches on this last point, which is the mentor's responsibility to help with the communication between the mentee and the overall supervisor. So, what does this look like in practice, successful mentorship? Well, Knowles talks about several points. I'm going to touch on 4 of them here. Number 1, the mentor needs to make sure that the mentee understands why they are learning or going through the task that they're going through. It needs to be experimental or experiential, meaning that something that they can put in practice, something that they can do, learn by doing, if you will. Number 3, the learners need to plan and evaluate themselves. So this is also part of this scaffolding of what we want them to do with the larger formative assessment that they will at one point do with their supervisor. But being able to model this with their mentor throughout the semester is a really nice low stakes environment where they're going through this process of reflection with the mentor and able to practice that before it becomes a formal assessment. And then, of course, we want to teach things that are immediate relevance. And this is why it's so important that the mentee really sets the agenda for what's going to be covered during their mentorship process. So I'm briefly going to talk about some case studies that were carried out within my department in 2019, 2020. We have done this entire OLIMR rubric on formative assessment process since 2015 when I established the program, the online language program at University of Arizona. But we didn't add the mentorship portion until about 3, almost 4 years later. So these are some of the findings from that particular context. We asked the mentors to meet with their mentee every 2 weeks during the first semester of online teaching. And some people who we felt like needed a second semester of mentorship, we allowed them to do that. But again, this expectation, they would meet at least twice a month. This was pre-COVID, so they could choose if they wanted to meet virtually or in person. It could be at a coffee shop, wherever they felt comfortable. And the agenda was set by the mentee. So the mentee, before meeting with their mentor, would make a list of the issues they were having, the questions they had, and send that to the mentor before they met, so that they could, when they sat down, both be aware of what they were coming to discuss and prepare for that. So what are some of our findings? And these are findings that our mentors reported. We asked them what their experience was with their mentees. And a few findings were the expectations and the reality. There was a lot of difference between that. So in the first meeting, there was a lot of venting. The instructor was overwhelmed, was perhaps upset about some of these differences they weren't anticipating, maybe struggling with technology, struggling with student demands. So the mentor really helped as emotional support. Second finding, supports changes in professional identity. So we briefly touched on this before. Again, the role of an online instructor is quite different than what a face-to-face instructor would do in the classroom. And this really emotionally affects our new instructors, because they're now having to assume this new role, this almost new identity. And I thought this was very insightful, that our mentor mentioned this. You know, the mentor says here, we're in a profession that is considered a vocation. It's part of your being. So the criticism feels like you're criticizing the person, not the job. And a lot of you that have either been supervised and evaluated or had to do evaluations, you understand this, right? It really gets to the core of one's being when we give feedback, even constructive feedback. A lot of time that criticism can be taken very harshly, right? So working with the new online instructor as they start to internalize what this new role looks like and this new behavior that has to come along with being an online instructor. The third finding with the mentorship is that it alleviates the cognitive overload associated with new online language instructors. There's so much to learn. It's a huge learning curve. And because we want to give them so much information and so many details, those of us who are in administration and we're supervising, a lot of times we go overboard and it's too much. Something we've done in our department, we used to do like a 2-hour orientation, of course, where we crammed it full of information. We realized, people weren't retaining it. Then we started to do where we recorded into chunks to make them more digestible chunks of information. And even then, there were questions. So the mentor then takes on the role of following up and making sure that the instructor is understanding even the most basic information. And Mentor 2 says, there is less pressure to provide all the information they might need in a 2-hour orientation. It was overwhelming, referring to the orientation, and not very productive. You have backup because the mentors answer a lot of questions that new instructors have at the beginning of the semester. And we have found, not only in our program, but the research also supports, that when a mentor is a peer, right, not a formal supervisor, but someone who also teaches in the program, someone who is not quote unquote your boss, then again, this is a less high stakes environment and you don't feel as intimidated going to a peer mentor to ask for help as you would if you had to go to your supervisor who just gave this very detailed orientation and you have to say, I zoned out after 40 minutes, I was too overwhelmed. And this should be finding 3. Again, it's this low stakes scaffolding. So this idea, Mentor 3 says that they feel that they're in a safe zone. They're not going to be criticized. So now that we've talked about mentorship, the benefits of it, basic steps on executing a mentorship program, and some brief case studies, I'm going to move on to the reflection and goal setting portion of this formative assessment cycle. So the mentorship, right? Many times it's going to happen before the formal evaluation, or at least that's what we would suggest in our assessment cycle, is that before the supervisor gives the end of year assessment, that the instructor has already been working with a mentor to work through some of the main issues they've had. So I'll go back here. So here we have the mentorship. Then toward the end of the semester, there would be a self-evaluation with the Olimer rubric that we present in the book. And then, of course, the self-evaluation should be compared with the supervisor evaluation using the same rubrics. What happens after the instructor and supervisor have filled out this rubric and evaluated the instructor is a reflection and goal setting meeting. So this meeting is where the findings are discussed. So at this debriefing session, goals should be recorded. So after a 30 or 40 minute debriefing session, and of course the instructor and the supervisor probably a week before or at least a few days before, have gone through everything. They've filled out the rubric. So everyone has a good idea of what's going on with this instructor or a specific course. And then they go into that meeting having both reflected on that. So it's a good time for goal setting to think about what are things that could possibly maybe be improved, what are areas for growth, things that maybe the instructor wants to try. So again, the goals don't always have to be an improvement on something, but it could be, I noticed in this area, you're lacking, or I noticed that perhaps you're interested in this. And then a goal could be set on the specific interest of the instructor. And the goals are not only recorded in an evaluation summary, which again, the evaluation summary is provided in the book, but the summary should be signed by the supervisor and instructor and then filed. So the following year, that summary would be taken by the supervisor, reviewed, and then questions would be asked about how the instructor has worked on the goals that he or she set in the past year. So what's the mentor's role in this goal setting process? Well, the mentor has several opportunities here. While we want the instructor to set personalized individual goals, sometimes the instructor may have a hard time coming up with goals, or sometimes the goals the instructor comes up with perhaps are not difficult enough, they're not measurable, or perhaps they don't align with what really was identified in the evaluation as an area for growth. So the mentor then would help the instructor to identify goals that align with the organizational needs, student needs, instructor needs, etc. They may do this by offering a menu of goals and saying, here's 4 or 5 possibilities of things you may focus on. Again, just choosing perhaps 1 or 2 for the year. And then guiding the mentee through this process. So the idea is that the mentor continues to remind, encourage, and challenge the instructor to take the feedback they were given during the debriefing session, think about the goals they set, and then follow through on those in the next academic session or year. And all of this really is just providing support, overall support for the instructor's professional development. So quickly, this is another case study that we carried out with this process of reflection and goal setting. Here we ask the instructors who participated in the formative assessment process with the Olimer rubric, we ask them to give their feedback on how the rubric and the reflection and debriefing process were different than past evaluations they'd had in language departments. Instructor number 3 says, the rubric made me reflect on everything I've gone through during the semester and inform me about the importance of professional development. And this instructor goes on to say, that a lot of times professional development and seeking out these growth opportunities get tossed to the wayside, especially when you're someone who's teaching a 4-4 load and it may not be incorporated into your workload. However, we know the issue with that is that can also stunt one's professional growth and their opportunity for promotion or different opportunities that may be on the horizon because they've been teaching so much that they have forgot to do professional development, service, or even academic parts of their job. So, case study 2, we have a graduate student here who actually tells us the goal that he or she has set and says, going forward, I'm going to try to decrease the amount of time I spend grading. And then very specifically says, I'm going to focus on grammar topics, not mark every error, and set a timer. So here we have an example of a very measurable, observable goal, and the mentor should easily be able to help the graduate student follow up on this during the following year. Case study 3, we have an adjunct faculty, and the adjunct faculty says, if I want to be a good online instructor, I know I need to learn some new teaching strategies. And also implement maybe some tools that aren't required by the program, but that could really, improve the class. Also, this this adjunct faculty says, I also want to incorporate oral feedback to my students. So we have kind of a broad goal here of adding new teaching strategies, non-required tools, and then more specifically, this idea of incorporating oral feedback. This is really a great starting point for the mentor to work with this faculty member throughout the following academic term. So what are some goal setting takeaways? Well, goal setting is ongoing, but in order for it to be successful, it has to be recorded. We suggest writing it down in the evaluation summary, again, provided in the book. Mentorship should be informed by and supported and support goals. So again, the mentor isn't just someone who says, yeah, sure, I'll talk to this person every now and then, but a goal is set. And this goal, again, should be set by the instructor, and it needs to be contextualized in what the institutional needs are, the student needs, and the instructor needs. But the mentor is there to support that. And then these instructor goals, when we have that communication, right, between the mentor, the instructor, but also the supervisor, and it might be the mentor that is, again, reporting back to the supervisor, then really we have this full circle of communication where the people, the supervisor or the people in administration who are making some of the larger programmatic decisions are informed of what's going on. They're informed about difficulties or opportunities that the instructors have had or opportunities they would like to have. And then they can really base their trainings and workshops on this feedback. So what are our conclusions here? Well, ecological formative assessment is not one size fits all. However, as you've seen in this panel, the Olamer rubric does offer different modules that can be customized so that we are meeting the instructor at their level, whether it be a novice instructor or an instructor that has 10 years of experience. There should be something in your assessment process that is going to meet each instructor's needs. Assessment should also include mentorship. So we're not just giving an evaluation, turning it in someone's mailbox, and then leaving it till the next year, but we're actually using the mentor to continue this formative process until the next assessment cycle. The process has to be clear. Everyone needs to know how it works. It needs to be done on a regular basis. A lot of times we hear about people who are evaluated once and then 8 years later they haven't had another evaluation. So it needs to be systematic. And then of course this process should grow and change. And that is one thing that we really think is terrific about the ecological formative assessment process that we propose in the book, is that it does change based on everyone's feedback, and all of the instructors have a voice and are heard. I hope that you've been able to take some positive points away from this, things that you can think about and apply to your own language programs. If you are interested, and I hope you are, you can buy our book here. Right now you can pre-order it at Georgetown University Press. If you have any questions, we would be very happy to hear from you. Please email us and we would love to provide any type of insights or feedback. Thank you.